Good morning, Tony Goldstone. It's first thing, 3rd of October 2024, and this morning you may be receiving a brown envelope that looks a little bit like this, which contains a so-called RPSS, or Remedial Pension Saving Statement. So I'm just going to explain a little bit what it's all about, and why you might be receiving one, and why you might not be receiving one. So all of this relates to the so-called McLeod judgment. And to understand McLeod, we've got to roll back to the beginning of the coalition government, and the government commissioned Lord Hutton because they thought pensions were getting a little bit too expensive as we were all starting to live longer and longevity was increasing. And so basically Lord Hutton said, well, look, we need to retain the public sector, who do a crucial role, and so we still need to give them a defined benefit pension. But essentially, Lord Hutton decided that they needed to be slightly less generous, and they made them less generous in two ways. Firstly, instead of it being final salary, it was career averaged revalued earnings, or CARE. So basically, it meant that it was looking at your overall salary over your whole career rather than just your final salary. And specifically because of the changes in how long we were living, rather than it being a fixed pension age, so typically 60 in the NHS, but 55 for some groups, it was going to be linked to state pension age. And obviously, because it's state pension age, that's a moving target. So if there were big changes and shifts in longevity, they could change state pension age rather than having to revisit this. And the part of the deal was that it was going to be fair to the taxpayer, fair to the public sector. The cost would be within a fixed envelope, and because of that, it kind of came with a 25-year guarantee that they wouldn't meddle. But crucially, Lord Hutton, who was a pretty smart chap, said age discrimination legislation means that it's not possible in practice to provide protection from change for members who are already above a certain age, and that stands to reason. You know, if you were older, you had more service in the old legacy schemes, and there was no need to give you a better position. And of course, for whatever reason, government ignored that and pressed on and gave full or transitional protections to older members, and that was deemed to be illegal because of age discrimination. So this is, I'm not going to go into McLeod in much detail and the remedy for it, other than just this summary on this page. So essentially, when you retire, you're going to decide what happens to this 7-year period. And so before 2015, everyone was in your old legacy scheme, so 95 or 08 for the NHS. After 2022, everyone's in the reform scheme, the new career average scheme. But when you retire, you're going to be given a statement that shows two positions, and you can pick for that 7-year period which one you want to be. And that is not going to be as straightforward as everybody assumes it might be. But they also had to remove the discrimination now. And to do that, they had to roll everybody back that they'd already moved over into these new schemes into the remedy scheme. And they did that for that whole 7-year period. And because of the delays from an annual allowance perspective, it also meant that they had to delay the 22-23 tax year as well. So we've got 8 years of pension taxation to revisit, and that is not as straightforward as you might think, because pension taxation has changed quite a lot during those 8 years. So in the 15-16 tax year, we had 2 mini tax years, and there was no tapering. Then there was a period where the taper thresholds were set, very close to kind of typical earnings for consultants, for example, and it caused absolute mayhem. In the 1920 tax year, we had the England and Wales compensation scheme, and then post the March 20 budget, we had the new high levels for the taper, and of course, there's been changes subsequent to that as well. So what's the consequence of that? The consequence of that is that there's a lot of people affected by McLeod. So there's about 1 million members in the NHS that are affected by McLeod, and of those, around 70 to 100,000 will have had pension saving statements at some point during that 7-year period, and those people are all going to need to get new pension saving statements to deal with the rollback. So this is what a remedial pension saving statement looks like. It's a blank one because none of the real ones have landed yet. But I'm just going to very quickly go over to that document just so we can have a look at what a blank one looks like. So just some bump explaining, what's the annual allowance all about, why we're sending you on, and we're sending you on because you're affected by McLeod, and also because your pension growth will have been over a certain threshold pre-rollback, and because of the rollback, everyone's pension growth is going to change. So I'll just kind of go through all the bump and show you kind of the main bit of it. So on this page, we can see we've got the new pension input amounts in both the schemes. We've also got the old pension amounts in both of the schemes, and we've got also the scheme pays elections that you've done if you've used scheme pays to pay annual allowance charges. And you'll notice that previously on annual allowance statements, you only used to get 3 years carry forward, but they give you an additional, so as well as these 8 years, they give you an additional 5 years, and this wasn't initially going to be the case. And so if I just flick back to the slides very quickly, so when the HMRC tool initially came out, I and others highlighted to them that the results that it was showing were wrong, because they'd only used 3 carry forward years before the remedy period, and that showed different results to the existing annual allowance calculator. So I've said for many years, don't just use 3 carry forward years. You need to put as many years as you can back into the calculator. And so this was someone just saying that their charge went down by £2,400, and so this was a worked example. So this was the original HMRC tool back in on the 6th of October of last year, and that showed £4,200 compensation for this year. But then thankfully they listened to feedback, and after correcting it in that year, it went from £4,000 to £9,000 compensation, and crucially the carry forward was matching the existing HMRC carry forward calculator. So just going back to the RPSS, so we've got all of the remedy years, new growth, old growth. We've got the 5 carry forward years. We've then got all the opening values and closing values, which aren't really of any use to most people unless they're trying to troubleshoot problems with AA. And then if we just go to the last page, because I think this is where it's all at, and this is the page that most people will use. We've got the combined growth for the old schemes, and we've got the new growth, and we've also got the existing scheme pays. Now, but for all of these 3 columns, everything's combined. And the reason why they've combined that, which is great, is the HMRC calculator asks for the combined amounts as well. So you've not got to be fiddling around as you used to with the other calculators, adding your pension growth in 95 and 15, etc. All of that's been done for you to make that process a little bit easier. Now, it's tempting to say, I've had enough of annual allowance, I'm too busy, I'm going to ignore this, but I would strongly advise you not to. And I'm just going to talk you through a little bit the reasons why it might be massively in your interest to do so. So, for the vast majority of members, their pension growth is going to go down very significantly compared to what it was previously, and there's 3 reasons for that. So lots of you might be familiar with some of the pay charts and pay work that I've done, and I've highlighted in yellow the remedy period. So for example, if you take this line here, which is the consultant line, you can see we had really significant pay erosion during that year. And the way that the 1995 pension scheme works is it's basically working out your annual allowance based on your pay growth relative to inflation. So for example, if we take a couple of the years during that period, we've got the 17-18 tax year, you had allowable growth of 3%, because that was the previous September's inflation figure, but the average award was around 1%. So that meant pay went down by 2% in real terms. Similarly, in the 18-19 tax year, the opening value, the previous September's inflation was 2.4%. Pay growth averaged about 0.7%. So again, another 1.7% cut. Really big numbers. Now, the issue is that previously, when you had negative growth, that should have produced a negative growth on your pension savings statement. But very unfairly, and I've campaigned on this for about 7 years, negative growth was zeroed out. And so that meant, particularly when we were in both pension schemes, people were massively disadvantaged by the combination of pay erosion and the very unfair way that it was calculated, ignoring negative growth. Now, fortunately, from the 23-24 tax year, after lots of lobbying by lots of different people, we now get negative growth counted, and that's going to make a huge difference. So that was reason one. Reason two is you obviously have higher accrual in the care pension scheme, and that leads to high growth. So the care scheme, the 2015 scheme, you get 1/54th of your pensionable salary each year, whereas the 1995 scheme is based on 80ths. Now, this is another kind of unfairness in the tax system, is that whilst the accrual is higher, they were intended to be broadly similar. So the 2015 scheme was meant to be broadly similar, because what they were trying to do is offset the later retirement age of going at state pension age with the higher accrual. So pension input amounts or pension growth should have been broadly similar, but again, because of unfairness in the system and unfairness in the way that DB pensions are valued, they don't account for the high pension age in 2015, which is frankly ridiculous. But again, that means that it's another big reason why pension growth is going to go down from the 2015 schemes to the 1995 scheme. And the other technical consideration is that not only will you get higher growth, if you were subject to the tapered annual allowance, then you get the double benefit of that helping out and lowering your adjusted incomes, because the adjusted income calculations include your growth as well. So kind of going back to that last page, so this is some example figures of what it might look like in reality. So we've got this column that has the old pension input amounts, and we've got these new pension input amounts, and the scheme pays loans, and you can see that some of them have gone down really substantially. So 21-22, 51 down to 33, 43 down to 36, 51 to 44, and so on and so forth. And so we can see for this member, they've got £70,000 lower growth in that brown envelope than they did in the brown envelopes that they had previously, for the three reasons I just mentioned. So this member is going to be getting £32,000 compensation. But the caveat to that is they're only going to get that £32,000 compensation if they act on the information in this brown envelope and access HMRC's digital tool, which is not for the faint-hearted. It runs to between 180 and 210 pages, depending on your circumstances. And when I say compensation, because, for example, this member's used a mix of paying cash and scheme pays, and this RPSS will only show the scheme pays bit because they're unaware of what you've paid by cash. That compensation will be a mixture of compensation to the scheme and compensation to the member, including interest. So that was it, just a quick whistle-stop tour of what's going to be landing on your map this morning. We know that a large number, over 50,000, were posted yesterday. So some people will get these statements, but others will be disappointed because some of them will need manual calculations. The NHS BSA obviously only covers England and Wales, and we know that some schemes are even further delayed and so won't be meeting the statutory deadline, the 6th of October. So we understand that's the case, for example, north of the border in Scotland, and also for other schemes that involve medics as well. So make sure you follow me on Twitter and I will keep you posted. Thank you very much.